I want to shift over to kind of this bifurcated recovery we've seen across gender lines. It's something that we're seeing even in the latest jobs report when we look into some of the unemployment statistics there. Also, the chunk of the labor force participation rate here across genders. And that's the subject of a new FactSet study looking into the way that men and women were both impacted by the pandemic. The recovery has not been equal. And of course, women also still lag behind men when it comes to board representation and top executive positions as well. So join us now for more on that is the CFO of FactSet, Helen Shan, joins us. Helen, thanks for taking the time to chat here. I mean, it's something that we've known for quite a few months when we look into the economic data. But when it comes to kind of this recovery, what's the biggest factor that's standing out to you in this unequal recovery across men and women?
Yeah, no, great. Thank you for having me on. It is really important. You talked about the fact of the unevenness. We've seen since the beginning of this pandemic that whether it's in percentage or decline or in total numbers, women have fared worse than men. We've lost more than 5 million jobs for women, a 7% decline. And that's going to have implications for the longer run. And that's mainly as it relates to the pipeline. You need to have folks who have been in the workforce as they work their way through. And our report in particular focuses on the executive leadership roles and boards globally. And we focus on this in particular for CEOs, board members, and non-exec CEOs. And the point of that is if you look at where the U.S. stands, if we look at women on boards, we're around 23%, non-CEO management roles around 22%, and with CEOs around 19%. And that puts us in the middle of the pack as it relates to developed economies. And that tells us something. It probably surprises some of us. But if you don't have the pipeline that goes and leads into it, then it's going to have longer term ramifications.
Yeah, Helen, when you think about the discussion that's been happening throughout the pandemic of the struggles women are facing, trying to juggle work as well as childcare. I mean, these are issues that were on the table even pre-pandemic. And certainly you could argue that's been reflected in some of these numbers you point to. Why do you think the U.S. has lagged so much, especially behind some of its counterparts in Europe?
Yeah, that's a great point. In some cases, there's always going to be the focus, the commitment, and then I'll point to process and policy. So in Europe, where they have some specific targets that they've set forth, either at a board level, for example, that's a well-known statistic, and that in some ways forces more of that movement to getting to those sorts of percentages. We don't have that necessarily here in the U.S. There's definitely been, one would say in the last year or so, an even greater focus. And when some of the moves that have been proposed by one of the exchanges, for example, that might move a greater share of mindset. But until there is likely to be that much more of a commitment from the top, the U.S. is going to struggle a little bit, perhaps, in catching up to what's been set in Europe.
Even looking further down, though, into some of those more, I guess, less senior jobs across gender lines, we've been talking about kind of the impact on different unemployment rates across racial lines, stemming from what kind of sectors a lot of these jobs are in when you look at race. But when you look at gender, I mean, how much of a role does that maybe play in the differences here, considering, Akiko was just referencing a lot of the childcare responsibilities being split up. And if someone has a work from home job versus one where you got to commute, how does that play in here?
Yeah, it plays a lot. And clearly it's always going to be a balance, male or female, in terms of the responsibilities. But we know in the society that it falls much more often on the woman. And therefore, that person will have to decide what kinds of roles to go in. And that makes a big difference as well. If we think about where in the CEO or on the board level, why is that so important? It's because it's in that room that decisions get made. It could be the virtual room at this point, the Teams video room, but that's where compensation, that's where opportunities, assignments, investments, promotions, those are where decisions are being made. And so where the representation is and how you get to that level will make a difference.
And finally, Helen, when we talk about the challenges women have faced over the last year, especially, how should we be looking at how long we're likely to see the impact of this down the line. Is this just a few years as we see the economy start to open up, things sort of start to resume, or is there a permanent loss here for many women who've decided to drop out of the workforce altogether because it's simply just too tough to do that, especially with the restrictions in place?
Yeah, that's a great question and a hard one to answer. So I'm going to be the optimist here and say that, like with many things with the economy, that bounce back, I believe that when the opportunities open back up, that women will come back. And I can't really speak to speed, but we know that ultimately the world is changing very quickly, and we need innovation to keep up. And innovation starts with lots of ideas, and lots of ideas require lots of experiences, and lots of experiences require a lot of diversity to get there. And that really then starts with inclusion. And I do believe, certainly many of the businesses or clients that we deal with, they understand that. And that means that there will be much more, hopefully, of a mindset. Like you had mentioned, a lot of these trends may have been happening even pre-pandemic. And so I think those will only now have even greater focus. And hopefully that will help bring more folks back into the workforce, because quite frankly, that's what we'll need to succeed.
Yeah, I guess if there's any positive in all of this, it has really sort of exposed the inequality that we're seeing in the workforce in that way. Helen Shan, CFO of FactSet, it's good to talk to you today.